this episode, we shift from talking about doing the right thing to proving you did the right thing, because audits do not run on good vibes. A lot of new learners picture an audit as a stressful interrogation where someone tries to catch you making mistakes. But the more accurate picture is that an audit is a structured way of asking, can you show evidence that your controls exist and that they actually work? When you are managing AI risk, this becomes even more important because the system can change over time, and because the harm from a failure can be hard to unwind once it reaches users. Evidence is not the same as intention, and saying we care about privacy or we take security seriously is not a control. A control is something you do consistently to reduce risk, and evidence is what proves that the control was in place and operating. The goal here is to help you understand what artifacts are, why they matter, and how to think about building them in a way that is realistic and sustainable. If you learn this mindset early, you avoid the panic of trying to invent documentation after the fact. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting definition is that an artifact is a tangible record that shows a decision, an action, a test, a review, or a result, and that record can be evaluated by someone who was not in the room. Beginners sometimes think artifacts are just documents, like policies, but artifacts are broader than that. They can include approvals, logs, change records, test results, monitoring reports, incident tickets, risk assessments, vendor evaluations, and even evidence that training occurred and was understood. The main idea is that an artifact should connect to a control, and the control should connect to a risk. If you claim you limit who can deploy models, you need evidence of access control and evidence that deployments are tracked. If you claim you test for safety failures, you need evidence of what tests were run, what the outcomes were, and what you did when you found issues. Artifacts are about traceability, meaning an auditor can follow a chain from policy to practice to proof. When artifacts exist as a natural byproduct of good work, audits become much easier. It is also important to understand what auditors are usually trying to learn, because that shapes what evidence matters. They want to know whether your organization has a clear process, whether people follow it, and whether leadership can see and correct problems. They also want to know whether your controls are designed appropriately for the risk, meaning you are not treating high-impact decisions like low-impact decisions. Another audit theme is consistency. Because random good behavior does not count as control, the behavior must be repeatable. Auditors care about accountability, meaning roles are defined and decisions have owners, and they care about completeness, meaning you did not only document the easy parts. With AI, auditors may also care about how you manage change, because model updates, data changes, and feature changes can shift risk. The most useful mindset is to imagine an auditor as a careful stranger who asks, "How do you know this is safe? And can you show me how you know?" When you plan artifacts with that question in mind, you build evidence that proves control, not intention. One common misconception is that writing a policy is enough, but policies are only the beginning, and they can even create risk if they promise more than you actually do. A policy might say all AI systems must be reviewed for privacy, but if there is no record of reviews, the policy becomes an empty statement. Another misconception is that evidence only matters at the end, like a final report, when in reality the best evidence is generated throughout the life cycle. It is much easier to capture decisions and results as they happen than to reconstruct them later. Another misconception is that evidence must be perfect or exhaustive, which scares people into doing nothing. In reality, good evidence is proportional and focused on key controls, and it is organized so that it can be found. You are trying to show a pattern of responsible practice, not an encyclopedia of every minor detail. When you understand these misconceptions, you can avoid the trap of either over-documenting everything or documenting nothing until panic sets in. A practical way to think about artifacts is to group them by what they prove, even though we are not going to turn that into a list you memorize. Some artifacts prove you planned, such as defining scope, roles, and risk appetite. Some artifacts prove you assessed risk, such as identifying threats, privacy concerns, and fairness concerns. Some artifacts prove you implemented controls, such as access controls, guardrails, and separation of duties. Some artifacts prove you tested, such as validation results, red teaming outcomes, and bias checks. Some artifacts prove you monitored, such as drift detection reports and safety alert summaries. Some artifacts prove you responded, such as incident records, root cause analyses, and corrective actions. Some artifacts prove you improved, such as updated procedures and retraining after lessons learned. This way of thinking helps you avoid focusing only on documentation that sounds official while missing the evidence that shows controls actually worked. For AI, the most valuable artifacts often come from testing, monitoring, and change management, because those areas reveal whether the system stays within safe boundaries as it evolves. Let's talk about risk assessment artifacts, because they often set the foundation for everything else. An AI risk assessment artifact should show what the system is, what it is used for, who it affects, and what could go wrong. It should capture assumptions, such as what data sources are used and what limits exist on outputs. It should also capture the reasoning behind decisions, such as why a certain use case is considered low risk or high risk. Beginners sometimes think a risk assessment is just a score, but the useful part is the narrative that explains why the score makes sense and what controls reduce the risk. A strong risk assessment artifact also shows who reviewed it and when, because timing matters when systems change. If you later update the model or expand the use case, you need evidence that the risk assessment was revisited. This is how risk management becomes a living practice rather than a one-time stamp. Change management artifacts are another major category, because AI systems can shift behavior with changes that look small on paper. You want evidence of what changed, why it changed, who approved it, what testing occurred, and what the plan was if the change caused problems. A beginner-friendly way to view change management is as a story about controlling surprise. If you cannot explain how a new version differs from the old one, you cannot predict risk, and you cannot prove you maintain control. Evidence here can include version records, release notes, approval records, and testing reports tied to that specific change. It can also include evidence of rollback planning, meaning you had a way to revert if something went wrong. Auditors often look for change management because it shows operational discipline, not just design intent. If your organization cannot show disciplined changes, an auditor will assume your system could drift into unsafe territory without anyone noticing. Building evidence for change management is one of the clearest ways to demonstrate real control over AI behavior. Testing artifacts matter because testing is where claims meet reality, and AI claims can be especially slippery if they are not anchored in evidence. If someone says the model is accurate, you should be able to show what accuracy means, how it was measured, and in what conditions it was tested. If someone says the system is safe, you should be able to show what safety tests were run, what failures were found, and how those failures were addressed. For beginners, it helps to remember that tests should reflect the use case, not just generic benchmarks, because the risk is tied to how people will use the system. Testing artifacts can include validation results, robustness checks, bias evaluation notes, and safety test summaries. They should also show the date and the version, because test results are only meaningful for the specific system state that was tested. Another important part is documenting what you did not test and why, because honest boundaries are better than pretending coverage is complete. When testing artifacts are clear, they become powerful evidence that controls exist beyond wishful thinking. Monitoring artifacts prove that your controls continue working after deployment, which is crucial because many AI failures appear slowly. A model might become less accurate over time because data shifts, or it might start producing more unsafe outputs when user behavior changes. Monitoring evidence can show what metrics or signals are watched, how often they are reviewed, what thresholds trigger investigation, and what actions were taken when alerts occurred. Beginners sometimes imagine monitoring as a single dashboard, but from an audit perspective, what matters is the record of review and response. If monitoring is performed but nobody can show that it was reviewed, auditors will treat it as unreliable. Evidence can include periodic review notes, incident tickets triggered by monitoring, and reports that summarize trends and corrective actions. Monitoring artifacts also connect strongly to accountability because they reveal who is responsible for noticing and acting when the system drifts. In AI risk management, continuous oversight is one of the strongest demonstrations of control because it shows you are not relying on a one-time safety check. Vendor and third-party artifacts also matter, because many AI systems involve external services, and auditors will care about how you manage risk you do not fully control. Evidence can include due diligence records, contract terms that address data and security, and periodic reviews of the vendor's posture. It can also include records of vendor incidents, communications, and corrective actions, because vendor events become your events if your users are affected. Another useful artifact is a dependency map that shows which third parties touch data or influence outputs, because that map makes hidden risk visible. Beginners sometimes think vendor documentation is only legal paperwork, but from an audit viewpoint, it is evidence that you understood the relationship and built controls around it. If a vendor changes terms, changes behavior, or experiences an incident, you need evidence that you noticed and responded. Without that evidence, you are effectively trusting a black box. Auditors do not like black boxes, especially when they influence decisions or handle sensitive data. Training and awareness artifacts are often underestimated, but they are a key way to prove the organization has operational control, not just technical control. If you have policies about how AI should be used, you need evidence that people were trained on those policies and that the training was relevant to their roles. Evidence can include training completion records, assessments or acknowledgments, and records of targeted refreshers when rules change. Another important training artifact is documentation of guidance that is actually accessible to users, because training once and then hiding the rules is not effective control. Auditors may also look for evidence that risky behavior was addressed, such as follow-up coaching after a misuse event. For beginners, the main idea is that people are part of the control system. If people do not understand their responsibilities, the best technical guardrails can be bypassed or misused. Training artifacts help prove that the organization is managing the human side of AI risk in a structured way. One of the most helpful ways to avoid audit panic is to treat artifact building as a design requirement, not as an afterthought, because evidence is easier to capture when you plan for it. When you design a workflow, ask where decisions happen, where approvals happen, where tests happen, and where monitoring happens, then ensure each of those moments naturally creates a record. That record should be easy to store, easy to find, and clear enough that someone else can understand it later. A common failure pattern is scattered evidence, where documents exist, but nobody knows where they are, which makes audits painful. Another failure pattern is vague evidence, where a document exists, but it does not tie to a specific control or a specific system version. The goal is not to generate mountains of paperwork. The goal is to generate a trustworthy trail of proof. When artifacts are created as part of normal work, audits become a review of your routine rather than a scramble to recreate history. This is what it means to prove control, not just to claim it. As we close, remember that audits are not primarily about catching you doing something wrong. They are about confirming that your organization can be trusted to manage risk consistently. For AI systems, that trust depends on evidence that controls exist, that they are followed, and that they continue working as the system changes. Artifacts are the proof that turns claims into credibility, whether those claims are about privacy, security, fairness, safety, or governance. When you build artifacts that connect clearly to risks and controls, you show that your organization is not guessing and not improvising. You show that decisions are intentional, reviewed, and traceable, and you show that problems lead to corrective action rather than denial. For brand new learners, the key takeaway is simple. If you cannot show it, it did not happen in the eyes of an audit. Building evidence early and continuously is one of the most practical skills in AI risk management because it protects both people and organizations when scrutiny arrives.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.